Hello and welcome to another of PAVE's weekly virtual discussion series. My name is Ed Niedermeyer. I'm the Communication Director at Partners for Automated Vehicle Education, or PAVE. I'm really thrilled that you are with us today because this is a topic, and I guess I'm super passionate about what our guest Patrick McGinty has done. I was lucky enough that Patrick and my paths sort of crossed kind of slightly unexpectedly, and he had mentioned that he was teaching this course, and I just got so excited about it, and I think that over the course of this conversation, you'll start to understand why. One quick reminder before we begin, though, there is an open source quote-unquote open source version of Patrick's curriculum for the course that he taught that we'll be discussing today. That's available page. It will also be available in our resource library at our website. So with that, I'd like to welcome Patrick McGinty to our weekly discussion series. Patrick, welcome. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Thanks. This is a thrill for me, so I appreciate it.
Yeah. No, like I said, I'm so excited about this. So let's dive right in. First of all, okay, so you teach English at Slippery Rock University in Pennsylvania, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. How does an English teacher get into AVs? Like, where does this even start?
I suppose. I mean, I have a fairly boring origin story, just as far as we'd moved into a new house in a new neighborhood. I knew intellectually that the AV sector was growing in Pittsburgh, where I live. And just one day, I was doing some work on the new house we moved into, and one, a new, prototype or whatever you would call them. You're now experiencing my inexpertise in necessarily the language about this, but one drove down our alley, which is a very, very terrible alley, and I was just kind of like, so they're doing alleys now. This is probably 2015, 14. I just thought, and usually when I have these experiences, I think, okay, this is happening, and why don't I know more about it? Should I know more about it? What's going on in the writing, the coverage of this? Usually when I'm not someone who's super interested in tech, but I'm very interested in how conversation around new things evolves. It's an area I sort of think about and write about a lot. So honestly, it was just an AV going down our alley, and I thought, I'm a reasonably smart person. I do not know that much about this, and then I just started reading and kind of never stopped.
That's awesome. Yeah, and Pittsburgh is one of those places where you can just see AVs driving down the road. And it's always awesome when that actually inspires people to really learn more. So teaching an English course centered around AVs is kind of a counterintuitive thing, or something that maybe people wouldn't immediately. How did that idea? How did your personal interest in this go? Towards actually building this course and this curriculum.
Yeah, so I had this, on the one hand over here, I have this personal interest that's kind of up and running. And then parallel to that, I had gotten my graduate degree at Portland State, where they had this university seminar program where they taught, they gave faculty the option to sort of teach sort of like a subject or something that's maybe their hobby, but doesn't fit into sort of a predetermined curriculum as sort of a special topics first year course. And I thought that was cool when I was at Portland State and kind of forgot about it. And then in a very, very weird coincidence, Slippery Rock, where I teach, modeled their new university seminar in part off of Portland State, which was like just very, very bizarre coincidence. And almost as soon as I heard that, I thought, yes, this would be perfect. I had some experience with that program at Portland State, and I just immediately wanted to do it at Slippery Rock. And so as far as how does it happen, I mean, I think I heard it and I put together a memo and a proposal like the next day. I was very early in on it, but I mean, honestly, how does it happen? It takes, and this is perhaps indicative of other things I'm going to talk about. Like, it takes buy-in across lots of different disciplines. Like, it takes my chair, English department chair, Danette DeMarco, like loaning out some English professors to teach these sort of special topics courses. It takes you know, Nora from dance, who runs the program, sort of meeting with people like me lots of different times. Jason from the honors college, who's done a great job making our honors college really diverse, even more so than our student body, meeting with me to talk about what can happen. Like, it just takes buy-in from lots of different people to make something like this happen. I mean, yes, I had this idea. I was very early on it, but from there, it was just a series of, you know, getting buy-in from lots of different people, lots of different disciplines, which honestly, as I was going through it, I was kind of like, this is sort of the AV world in miniature. Like, you've got this idea and this thing, but now we need to convince all these other people to sort of get on board with what we're attempting to do here. So, I mean, I'm not going to take too much credit for this idea. My university was already pursuing this program, which has gone really well. There's been, you know, 56 faculty, I think, so far, doing some topics like wildfires or protest movements or food systems, things like that. And my driverless car program was one of the first ones last year.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that I love about AVs is that it's a lens through which you can look at almost anything. And I kind of discovered this was the case with cars before I really got into AVs. And I'm, you know, it seems like that's sort of the real advantage of using AVs as a learning tool or a way to center, you know, a course. What were your goals? Like, what were you hoping that students would get out of this course, and like, why were AVs an important or like a good way to accomplish that?
I mean, just what you said. I mean, look, there's university. This program has specific goals about intellectual and academic rigor, about sourcing, evaluating sourcing, which I'll maybe talk about later. But fundamentally, I view these courses as learning the interdisciplinary nature of really everything, of any sort of subject, how to look at it from multiple angles, which, I mean, I don't know how grotesquely this will embarrass you, but you talk about this like on the first or second page of your book, where you talk about, you know, like getting into cars from an early age and seeing how they're not just cars. It's about economics. It's about policy. It's about all these different things. It just made total sense to me that these objects, I mean, one of the tricks to this course is it's not really about the object or the technology at all. I mean, it's a non-technical course. It's purely cultural, interdisciplinary. So yeah, exactly. My goal was to get them to see how their major or their interest or their discipline connected in some way to driverless cars. And my other goal was just that they became, and this happened almost instantaneously, that they just became really chatty about it, that they would just come in and be like, so I was talking about my aunt and she's worried about this and blah, blah, blah. And suddenly they're asking me all these questions. And it shows that they're already talking to an aunt about it, or a neighbor or something, who's giving questions to them that they're giving to me. And I'm like, well, I'm just an English professor. I don't know this answer, but let's talk about it. Let's find some resources. So that was really cool. That was kind of one of my quiet goals of the course. I mean, yes, like I said, there's all these official university decreed goals, but one of my goals was just to learn alongside my students, just to really see what interested them, and to try to really incorporate that into the course. Like, try to just see what their interests were, see what they were confused, curious, excited about, and just start immediately folding into the course, folding into the next week's reading, discussion, everything. And that really happened, and it was terrific. I heard like one student had a Grandpa Bob. Like, Grandpa Bob had like so many questions and was just like constantly coming up in class discussions and stuff. But I mean, like, and it was like maybe like a pinch tedious that Grandpa Bob was like sort of auditing the course, but at the same time, like, that's the goal. Like, that was awesome, you know, like that they're taking the material and they're talking outside of class about it. So that was sort of the more subtle, not listed necessarily anywhere on a syllabus goal, but it was definitely one of mine heading into it. And it just started happening instantaneously in a way that it really made me proud.
Yeah, that's so cool. So I think you've now touched on two things that I think make AVs like such a really a great topic for almost any kind of education. And one is, like we said, the sort of flexibility, right? To not just discuss a lot of different kinds of issues, but also like what's interesting to you personally, which I can definitely see like would help a kid stay engaged in a course that otherwise, I mean, I certainly can remember English courses from my college days that were not like super engaging. But the other one is that AVs get people excited and intrigued about stuff that they might, that they might not otherwise. I'm wondering, before the class even started, when people were coming into it, were they coming in excited? Did the topic of AVs get, students more excited about, again, a sort of introductory English seminar than they might have if presented this sort of same basic course in a totally different way?
Yeah, some definitely were. I mean, like on the first day or two, really, I did kind of a survey of what's our interest here, because as first year students, they get to sort of rank their preference for these seminars, which they're sort of loyal to, sort of scheduling things happen. So some were like, yes, I want to be here. I think this is awesome because I'm, mechanical engineering or something. Or yes, I think this is awesome just because I'm interested and it's cool. I definitely had some who were like, I have no idea what I'm doing in here, or like why this is going to be relevant to me. It was very, very satisfying to sort of go on that journey with those students. And even some of their comments, we can maybe talk later. You already mentioned the curriculum we're putting together, and I solicited some student feedback, and it's really neat to hear from those students, and some of those student comments who are just like, what I knew about cars was that I got my license like in a Honda Civic when I was 16, and that concludes my knowledge about cars, and sort of see how much they learned about all the sort of different interdisciplinary angles to study it. So yeah, some students were definitely drawn to it. I definitely think it's got a certain I don't know, snazziness to it or whatnot. I mean, there's definitely some students in the course who, like, you could tell, like, they came in knowing some stuff. Like they have like some posters in their rooms of cars, and they know what Elon's saying on Twitter, and they know, like, they come almost with like a little too much enthusiasm. Not that that's bad, but so it was definitely a hook. I mean, it was definitely I think an attractive course, but more than just attracting. I wasn't as interested in like, will people sign up for this course? I was more seeing just with what happened with the group I was assigned.
Yeah, and so you mentioned sort of how this topic allows people to sort of find their own way into it, right? How it relates to the things that they're maybe already interested in, already paying attention to. Like, are there a couple of examples of maybe students who had a kind of a distinctive area of interest that they were able to sort of connect to AVs that sort of illustrates that?
Oh yeah, I mean, gosh, so many. I mean, some that are more logical, some that are more, somebody who's maybe in environmental science or biology, or different students who are naturally interested in, okay, like electrification or versus, what's this going to do to traffic, commutes, different things, where maybe they were just more naturally interested in that. I had some I'm always really impressed by how much students advocated for groups that I did not think of at all when I was their age. Particularly like the disability community. I had a lot of students, and Slippery Rock is very much in some ways veering towards more healthcare professions, or sort of lots of healthcare majors, both sort of at nursing levels, at sort of administrative levels, different things. And like when I was 18 and 19, I was not thinking about the disability community. Like I just don't think I was at all. And like, that's an example of, they were, when we read a text, they were like, well, I'm interested to hear more. He didn't really cover this at all, like, how this is going to affect different populations. Like, can I find some, and they did sort of do other projects that led them down that road. So that was like one area. Some of the healthcare related majors and students were really interested in that in a way I just found very admirable, especially given their age. Like I was just sort of like, I was not thinking about those communities back in, the late 90s, early 00s. And I could blame that on, the culture at large, and on my own upbringing or whatever, but like, I just wasn't as large-hearted a person back then. There were also just other really cool ones like I had some dance majors. Shout out to the dance department. They're amazing. They have to keep like a some really high GPA in order to perform. So they all do amazing. Like they're really motivated group, and we have a good dance program. And, you're sort of thinking, okay, how's this going to, like, that's one where I'm kind of thinking, okay, how am I going to make this tie? And they came up with such great stuff. They would talk about how when you're choreographing a performance or a piece or something, you start with individual movements, then you have to consider the space. You rehearse, finally there's a performance. And they were analogizing it to sort of research and development, and sort of starting with an individual car, and how does the tech work on that car, but then how does it participate in an ecosystem of traffic, of people, of movement, of spatial movement, like an intersection, and almost sort of comparing it to their own choreography, and also the need to revise and practice and practice and practice. And that was one of the first responses I got in our second unit, and I was just like, yes, this course is working and it is going to work. Like they are. I'm sitting here worried about, like, I kind of don't totally know how dance is going to connect to driverless cars, but they're taking it from an angle and talking about intersections and rehearsals and movement and just ways that, and connecting it to even theorists from dance about the nature of movement and different things. And I was just blown away. I quite frankly, I was just like, I have nothing to add. It was actually weird for me because I have really nothing to add on a technical level about driverless cars. I really have nothing to add on a technical level about dance either. So I was just kind of a reader, I was just kind of sitting back reading and just like, this is incredible. I love all of this. I could maybe point out a comma here or there too, but in general, like the level of critical thought connecting these different disciplines was just incredible. I could sit here for another hour doing so many of these, that it was just really a great way to teach a subject like this.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, this is my, my interest in AVs is that you can look at a lot of different areas, and I have a lot of different interests. It never would have occurred to me how to begin to connect dance to AVs, but what you're talking about, it shows that these connections are everywhere. Like AVs deal with so many different things, that even dance, is something that you can find, relevance to AVs, and that's awesome. And I think especially as, we have a society-wide conversation about this technology and how best to deploy it and how to relate to it as a society, I think all those diverse perspectives are really valuable. And that's why I think courses like the one you taught and just aviation in general is so important. And that's why I'm also really glad that you've allowed us to publish your curriculum, which I really, not a professional educator myself, coming from journalism, I'm learning a lot about education, how to do it well. And what I loved about your curriculum was sort of the creative approaches that you took to teaching, and so I wanted to go through the 4 main units that you taught, and just sort of love to get your thoughts on, just sort of why this approach and what was it able to accomplish. So let's start with unit 1, which is constructing a historical context for American innovation. I think this is a really awesome place to start a course like this. So what was that unit? What did you have the students do, and what were you trying to accomplish with that?
Yeah, so starting the course with a history for innovation, like here's my like one hot take I'll give in this talk to a lot of people in the AV sector who I don't really interact with otherwise. Like, I completely understand why to pitch your companies and products and different things, you need to make it sound like the greatest thing ever. I even get on a personal level why to get up in the morning to work the long hours you do to do the things you all do, which I could never do. You need to sort of be thinking, I am on the cutting edge. I am breaking ground. I am trying to do this incredibly hard thing. The reality is that, like, segueing into the public, and again, this is just my hot take, I think the public might just be more interested to know, like, yeah, this has been done a lot before, but this is a new way, in a new way that's sort of, there is a historical precedence for this. I did not want to send my students into what at the time was kind of still the AV hyperbolic sort of news discourse. Like, I really wanted us to be grounded in this idea that, like, the world is old. Everything has happened a million times over. Old stories and events just put on a new pair of glasses and a new hat every once in a while and sort of come to us in different ways. So I wanted to ground them in historical context by sort of looking at previous technologies, how they succeeded, failed, slowly succeeded, sped up and crashed. And I also did it via an oral history project. So what I did was I had them choose a 20th century technology and just sort of conduct an oral history about that project, a washing machine, a Walkman, some sort of product where they had to go out and solicit scholarly writing about that product or technology or innovation, also talk to older people than them, grandparents, neighbors, former teachers, and sort of construct what was the life cycle of this technology. And again, I did this for two reasons. One was just to kind of establish, like, okay, driverless cars are not the first innovation ever in the history of the world. Like there have been other stories that we can perhaps provide some kind of template for, or for our own study. And also just to get them talking. Again, so many of them, what would happen was they would say, okay, Grandma, do you remember your first washing machine? Well, why do you want to know about that? Well, it's for a course on driverless cars. Well, what are you learning in driverless cars? And suddenly it's creating the kind of dialogue that I want to have happen in the course. So I love the oral history component of it. And honestly, the project just really gave us a good template for things in the course, like, that some products would sort of start slowly and have lots of problems and then slowly rise, and suddenly they're completely integrated in society and we don't think a thing of them. Maybe driverless cars will be like that. So one really great group did self-checkout machines, which was kind of cheating because it's like kind of 21st century, but they did just a great job at self-checkout machines that seemed like they were going to come in and completely take over. But now we've just kind of commonly accepted that it's like half and half. We go into a Target, there's some self-checkout machines, there's some cashiers. And also that group did an outstanding job looking at, well, what types of jobs do they displace? what is the cost, and they looked at it in a way that was really interesting, and that self-checkout machines kind of took away jobs, and they found from traditionally, lower paying women, people of color, like groups that, are already marginalized. But they also, at the flip side, said that, really the only main benefit of self-checkout machines is maybe a little bit to the customer, but it's mostly to the company at hand. Whereas, let's say, even if AVs do have a similar labor effect, they also bring these other positives, potentially environmentally, potentially, and actually starting to get into the calculus of like, well, this is perhaps similar to self-checkout machines and that they kind of coexist with cashiers and they might have a similar effect, but to their perspective, self-checkout machines didn't bring enough positive to justify their sort of assimilation, whereas they felt that driverless cars potentially could add, more positives. That's to say that who knows what the labor effects will be. So just starting to have these discussions that then we kept having throughout the rest of the term. We would call back to the washing machine, which like original washing machines used like gallons and gallons and gallons and gallons of water and were horrifically environmentally unfriendly. Not that they're necessarily great now, but just how they improved over, some of these technologies really just improved and sort of assimilated and got better and better. Others were just like horrific flame outs, that stuff I'd never even heard of. Some game, Virtua Boy, that like made people's eyes go red, some weird 3D game. I don't even really remember it. But so basically I just wanted people to have a historical context before we went into the driverless car discourse, which I'm sure many participants know on here is sometimes full of great writing and sometimes is full of extraordinarily questionable writing and content. So I wanted them to be grounded.
Yeah, no, that's such I just love how it forces them to think about other kinds of technology and connect sort of what are the attributes of the technology with how was it adopted. And that's really where you start to get a deeper understanding of things. And sort of almost, and I think also, being exposed to all of the different things that other kids in the class have chosen gives you a lot of different examples to think about sort of why was it so different in these different cases. Because I have to say in public discourse on Twitter and stuff, like there's sort of this tendency to have everything everything is going to be like the iPhone, which was a very fascinating sort of example of technological adoption, but it's really at one extreme, and there are so many others.
Yeah.
So we got to keep moving here, because we're
Yes.
and we'll probably go over the 30 minutes that we've allotted for this, because I think it's a fascinating conversation. Feel free, if you have to leave, that's fine, but we're going to probably keep talking here for a little while. So Unit 2 was placing driverless cars into historical context. What did you do there? And again, what was the sort of the goal of that?
Yeah, I'll be shorter here. I mean, here was, okay, we have to start reading about it. Find me some Twitter accounts online who are talking. We read a book, No One at the Wheel by Sam Schwartz, which I was just looking for something general, accessible, not something that was about a specific company or a specific approach. This was also a little while ago, so some stuff hadn't come out yet. And in general, something I started to do, and this is like the English teacher in me, is I wasn't as concerned in like what they thought about the information, but like which approaches they thought were most effective. As far as Schwartz sometimes tells personal stories of himself or other people, sometimes uses statistics, starting to get them to think about what approaches are most convincing, like not just which ideas are they starting to fall in line with or start to be interested by, but how are those ideas, being presented? Which avenue do they sort of find most appealing? So some of that kind of rhetorical analysis was part of the course, sort of source evaluation and stuff that this unit, they started, and they started understanding, the trolley problem, or some of the more like basic concepts of it that most of them, fortunately, in future projects kind of move past rather quickly.
Yeah, and I have to imagine that getting, sort of teaching material, textbooks on this stuff, I mean, as you say, things change probably from the time that you proposed the course to when you actually taught it. I'm guessing there were some significant changes in the AV world. So what I love is you and it seems like you must have been kind of forced to use stuff like Twitter discourse and podcasts and things like that to teach it, because that's the only thing that's contemporary, right?
Oh yeah, I looped in podcasts. I mean, yours. I mean, obviously, different feed. Like it became very newsy, very quick, which was great. Like I mean, I remember the night of the Cybertruck reveal. Like I mean, I go to bed pretty early, and that was a West Coast event. I wake up at 5:45, jump in the car, drive to teach my 8 a.m. class. Hadn't looked at anything. I walked into my 8 a.m. honors driverless seminar course, and they were all like sort of like showing stuff and talking and whispering, oh my God, look at this. And I was like, is there like a school shooter or something? Like what is happening right now? Like I don't like what is going on? And they sort of showed me what happened, and they're the ones who sort of were already dialed into like what had happened the night before in the AV sort of adjacent space. And like that was so cool to me that they were sort of starting to get into the bloodstream a little bit of what was happening. So that was a very memorable morning from that course, because I was really weirded out. They were all like they were all being all shifty and like looking at their phones and like talking and whatnot. And that was like another one of those moments where I was like, okay, this course is working. They're finding the people who are talking about this.
Yeah, I think there's something about the immediacy of it, and the fact that we're still so early in this whole thing even playing out. And I think again, that's both what draws people in, but it's also why it's so valuable. Is that we do need people with all these different perspectives, sort of again having this conversation about this technology and what it's going to do. And the beautiful part is that anybody, you could be a college kid and you could join Twitter today and you could start talking about this. You can literally just join the conversation and be talking to people who work on the technology and potentially even having some influence on them. I think that's a really, there's not a lot of opportunities like that, I don't think. So let's go to Unit 3. And I know we've reached our 30-minute time period here. We'll try to keep it to another 15 minutes at the most, but let's through Unit 3, creative interpretation, placing characters into driverless cars.
So one of the two biggest problems with the AV sector, or just writing or thinking about it, is one, like how do we see into the future? It's hard, it's predictive. Another one that's kind of hard is like how to see into some of your companies who are watching this. I mean, you're all trying to do your own sort of individualized, siloed approaches and whatnot. And one thing that I'm sort of a a creative writer by trade, and fiction just has an unbelievable ability to help humanity see through walls that it otherwise couldn't. Let's go, instead of trying to imagine the future, well, let's exist in the future, or let's exist in what this working at this company might be like. And so I asked students to write, a graphic novel, a short story, screenplay, any sort of creative project. And I mean, it was just incredible. I mean, just so incredible, some of these projects. I mean, there was one student who wrote a choose your own adventure sort of story about, you choose an AV or a sort of you pilot the car yourself at every turn, except the trick of it was that it ended up not mattering. Infrastructure, like horribly funded infrastructure, just thwarted you at every change. Like you kept having like awful accidents happening because of like crumbling bridges and potholes and all this other sort of stuff. That her sort of thing was like, this AV discussion is entirely beside the point. Which I'm reading this and I'm like, that is incredible. Like you had this idea that was sort of germinating in class, and something about these creative approaches really got their hopes and anxieties and sometimes just their humor to sort of bubble up in the surface that wouldn't otherwise happen in a normal assignment. I mean, there were so many about sort of helping, like I said, the elderly community. There was like a really funny one about a massive Titanic sized AV driving across the country slowly, like and sort of succeeding at some things and failing at others. And it was this really funny graphic novel. And it was just a really terrific project that, again, I sort of gave them some guidance, but I just wanted to see what would happen, what would come to the surface if asked to really actually peer into the future, near future or far future. And again, this is another thing where I could sit here and tell just dozens of amazing projects, but it was something I was a little more nervous about doing, even though it was my background. I wasn't sure how it would go, and reading them was just such a delight.
Yeah. It seems like so often, people think of education as this sort of, one way sort of, I transmit facts to you and you faithfully reproduce them. And I think just from personal experience, like, doing creative work is, it gives you skin in the game. It gets you thinking for yourself and engaging your own thoughts about how you relate to whatever the subject matter is. And actually, I'd never written any fiction before this year, and I made a New Year's resolution myself to write 4 short stories about AVs. And I have to say, it's an amazing.
It's great.
Well, I don't know if they'll ever be public. We'll see, and they're definitely not all done. So I'll just be lucky to make my end of year deadline at this point. But what it really did was, it was like, okay, stop thinking about this stuff analytically, start thinking about it like what's going to make a good story about an AV. And then when you start to write that, when you get the idea of that, then you can be like, okay, but what makes it a good story? And oftentimes you're like tricking yourself into coming up with an insight by not just sort of going directly for it, by telling a story. And that to me was like a really cool thing that's happened through this sort of random decision I made to write some short stories. So I love that that's part of your curriculum as well, because again, I there's nothing gets you more engaged in something than again, like trying to tell a new story about it, not just reproducing information that's been passed to you, but taking the information that you received and turning it into something completely new. So that's really cool. Number 4 is another example of just like a pedagogical tool that you used that would never have occurred to me, but like having done Model United Nations in high school, I was sort of like, oh yeah, that is actually a really great way to learn things. Describe number 4, which is Stakeholder Symposium, placing ourselves into the AV discussion.
Yeah, when I started talking to people, because in prep for the course, I'd start emailing with people, having coffee with people, and everybody kept saying like, oh, well, we need to have a discussion. We need to have a discussion. There needs to be a social discussion about this. Everybody kept saying like, there needs to be more discussion. And so I kind of just at some point was like, I just want to put all of you into the same room. I just want to put like all these different people into the same room. So I let students basically say, you're going to pick a persona who's you're interested in, is relevant to your major. You're going to study them. You're going to present sort of their view. You sort of had to try to encapsulate their AV worldview down to a single line, present on it, present on their sort of rhetorical style. Do they give TED Talks? Do they do scientific research? Do they host podcasts? And then like present, and then we're gonna have discussion after your presentation of other people sort of talking with you from their own persona. So you not just have to present on your persona, but you have to be able to sort of speak from your own persona. And like there were just so many great, I mean, you're sitting there and you're hearing these different people in conversation. You're hearing, a lot of it was localized to Pittsburgh. You know, some bike advocates, some disability community activists, and different people who are talking to like CEOs of major companies. There were just some really fascinating conversations. Somebody was Andrew Yang, who has, you know, lots of automation thoughts, and because this was back in fall 2009, he's kind of in the news. And somebody else was, I think, Brian Selesky. And these two students like started talking and having a very, very high level conversation. And like, I just stopped taking, I'm supposed to be sitting there grading and like doing my thing, but I was just like sitting and bouncing in and whatever. And then the class ended and I was like, shit, I didn't write a single thing down. I just didn't write anything down. I was just fully there. They were talking and someone else jumped in, and yeah, it was just a really terrific way to spend the last couple of classes. And some of these students, you know, the honors seminar I taught, they wrote sort of a letter of summarizing their discussions that they sent to some of their personalities. And many of them received feedback. I mean, people sent their books, people offered to read work, there's relationships that have still been ongoing from that course. You know, and some of them reached out during the process to sort of like try to touch base and sort of say they were doing it. Some people were, you know, obviously maybe a little too high level to be concerned about that. Some people were also maybe a little bit too interested to, you know, espouse their ideas upon a freshman college student who were just very, very interested in a willing audience. But that was all really instructive for my students to engage with how professionals sort of think and work, and their willingness to sort of reach back out. I had a lot of really great people from the AV sector who really went the extra mile for some of my students, and sending them a copy of their book or getting back to them or sort of helping them with future projects. Some of the Stakeholder Symposium projects ended up becoming larger projects that students continued working on outside of the term. I worked with one student who was a parts runner, who like sort of, I don't even really know what that means, but he's sort of like a parts runner for some distribution company. He runs parts to different parts of the state, and very intimately familiar with delivery and like last mile problems and things like that. He sort of put together a research project on that idea. And a lot of that came, and his personality, Steve Viselli, kind of trucking labor person, maybe some of you know him, was just great in emailing with my student and helping them. So it was a great way to end the term, and also get them to see that there's just real people trying to work through these problems. Some of the students had a hard time pinning down people's like succinct AV thoughts, and sometimes it was because they fluctuate, things change, you know. Other times it's because like, well, this person used to work there, now they're like a consultant and they're saying slightly different things, now they're doing this. And it's like, you kind of see like adults try to like navigate the real world of an evolving field. And those were great conversations to have with students, where they would bring me stuff and they'd be like, they said this, but then they said this. And we'd talk about like, was that because the world has changed? Has their view changed? Have their motives changed? You know, that was a really great way to teach like how to evaluate information, which again was one of the points of the course.
Yeah, absolutely. It's for me, it's so frustrating. You know, there's the saying that, right, sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, and like I think that's really true with AVs, and people oftentimes sort of have that sort of relationship to it, that it is sort of like magic. And it's very hard, in part because these, you know, a lot of the people who work in the field are relatively private people compared to certain other sectors, but also, you know, there's just not a lot of emphasis on the people who are actually, you know, working on the issues around AVs. And, you know, I think to understand things, like things come from people, and who are these people and where do they come from is a really just fascinating way to approach the issue, and one that to me addresses like one of the big issues with how the public relates to this technology, is grounding it in people, whether that's the people developing it or also just the people that it impacts, right? Which is also clearly something that has gone throughout this course. So as we wrap up here, sort of what was the student response? I mean, you've said multiple times, it seemed pretty clear to you that the class was successful. What did students tell you, and maybe what were some of the most effective or most fun or most engaged, like what did they like the most, and maybe like where did they suggest improvements for next time you teach the course?
Yeah, I mean, most of the seminars, the success of these is in part indicated by like when I solicited some feedback for your project we're working on, I got so many responses so fast from students I haven't taught for a year that like I could tell you a lot of numbers and a lot of different things, but like that they could remember their projects, email me about them, email me feedback, help me out like instantaneously. That's kind of all you would need to know. In general, the seminars have been, to my mind, great at Slippy Rock. I mean, there's roughly Nora, the wonderful woman who's helped me out. You look at all these metrics and everything's at 75% or above for sort of, positivity, learned interdisciplinary material. Like, the seminars have been going, really well. As far as some of them didn't like most of them, they're, more interested in more podcasts, more articles. The book was whatever. A lot of people ended up liking the book, but, still an 18-year-old grew up in a digital age reading, 200, it's not even that long. It's like 260 pages or something, but it's like big font too, but whatever. So some textual things is probably the number one, if there was a complaint. I mean, I'll say the thing that resonated the most is when we really got going with discussions late in the term, it really started to become clear they weren't worried about the technology. They were worried about this country's ability to do it right. They weren't scared. I mean, some of them were. I'm speaking very grandly here, and there's perhaps a way where this sounds kind of cheesy, that old like, oh, the new generation doesn't think they'll be as well off as their parent, or oh, the new generation doesn't. There's ways in which that information's maybe vague or whatever. But I spent 3 hours a week for 16 weeks with 75 students. I have a pretty good feel for their reactions and their responses. And it was pretty clear by the end that for majority of them, they understood how it could work. They understood like the different issues. They saw the different angles, and like most of their anxieties were just about, not that it's a political problem or it's a, not that it's necessarily even political in nature, but just, they don't know words like techlash probably, or they wouldn't speak in those terms, but those were more of the anxieties. That was interesting to me. It wasn't about the technology or will I ever get in one or both, like these sorts of things. It was just like, will this country be able to do it right? And mind you, this was fall of 2019. This was before we've done some other things a little bit wrong. So I can't imagine that sentiment has been fortified. And that was somewhat depressing. No, not somewhat. It was depressing to hear, but also made me think that they were really thinking things through critically. I don't know what to do about that on a specific level. So,
well, I will tell you. I mean, that sort of what your students identified is the thing that motivates me personally, and I think a lot of us at PAVE the most, which is are we ready? The technology, and there's a lot of debate. People like to focus on the technology itself, and is it ever going to be ready or will it not? And I think if you study the technology, it's pretty clear it will happen in the way that it needs to happen, but that it will happen, and that the real question is exactly what your students came down on, which is, are we going to be ready? And what gets me so excited about this conversation, about the curriculum that you've agreed to share, is that I think the solution is teaching these kinds of classes, teaching kids at a relatively young age, that, hey, we live in a time of really dramatic technological change. They've probably seen it in their own lives. It's a relatable concept, but that, we as a society need to adapt to that by getting better at having these kinds of social conversations about how do we use this the right way? How do we spread the benefits of this technology in an equitable way? Because as your students sort of intuited or reason their way to, really, that doesn't always happen, right? Especially if there isn't an effort. So I know it doesn't really help your students to say, like, well, the solution is what you just did, but I certainly think so. Yeah.
No, if I'm an AV optimist in any way, it's that the slowness of the assimilation or whatever is a good thing. Like, it's incredible I was able to teach this course before it existed. I realize nobody in this chat is like maybe excited to hear that. Like, great, it took you so long that I got to teach a course about it before you could make it happen. I realize that's maybe a jerk thing to say, but in the long run, I really, really do think if you could have taught courses about Facebook before Facebook happened, if you could have taught and encouraged discussion about new technologies before they happened, they would have gone better. And I do think if I'm an AV optimist, it's because of that.
I actually personally agree with you a lot. And yeah, I think there's just a ton of great arguments for that. And frankly, the Facebook, teaching people about social media before we had it, I mean, that would have been an amazing thing. We had to kind of muddle our way through it, and the results have not been ideal. So unfortunately, we need to wrap up here. But before we do, what if someone is listening to this who's a teacher, maybe even like the high school level or in college, like, and they're like, yes, I get it. This is awesome. I want to do this. What is sort of the main? Obviously, you've again, thank you so much for sharing this curriculum that you worked hard to put together. But sort of what, in addition to that, what would be the advice that you would give them? In how to sort of run either this course specifically or something in the general vein.
Yeah, I mean, it's good advice for any teacher and advice I've gotten before, but just embrace your inexpertise. You're not going to know everything about this. It's sort of liberating to just know this is changing too rapidly to keep up with. Embrace your inexpertise, but incorporate your expertise. If you're big into history, if you're a history professor or teacher, like, go big on the historical context. If you're fine arts or dance or painting, like, do a bigger creative interpretation unit. If you're more businessy or something, do company profiles or pitch decks for different things. I mean, embrace your inexpertise, but also, like, lead where your own, incorporate the type of unit that's going to best bring out your most curious teacherly side.
Well, and I think one of the really cool things, and you sort of reflected this throughout this conversation, is that this was an educational experience for you too. I mean, you learned from your students learning, right? Which is great.
Sure. I mean, like I said, over and over.
Yeah. Well, and I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think all of us in AV education, we have to see it as, this is not, a teacher lecturing. We have to do this sort of seminar approach where the teacher is learning as much as the quote unquote students. Those barriers those distinctions don't really mean anything in this space, because, as you say, it's all changing all the time. No one can be, even if you're a super expert on one narrow part of it, which you have to be very specialized to be really at the leading edge of any one piece of this, whether it's machine learning or the legal side or whatever else. You're then limited by that specialization, and meanwhile, AVs have the potential to affect all these other things. And I think that's what's so important is even the experts, it's important to learn about things that you're not expert in, so you can have that more holistic view of this technology. So listen, we have to wrap up, but Patrick, thank you so much for doing this class in the first place, for sharing it with us, and for taking the time today to discuss it.
Of course, happy to help, and open to anybody who wants to talk more about it.
Yeah, and you can find Patrick's curriculum on our Medium blog, which is medium.com/PAVE campaign. You will also be able to find it on our resource library, which is at pavecampaign.org. If you're at all interested in teaching a course, even remotely similar to this, I highly recommend you go and check out that curriculum. Patrick did an amazing job. Like I said, lots of just different unique teaching tools that we've discussed here, and I'm really excited to see. I really hope that this is something that sort of takes off, and we see more of this kind of education happen elsewhere. Also, if you are an educator, feel free to contact us at PAVE. We have a contact form on our webpage. I would be happy to connect you to Patrick or any resources that we can provide to help you, take this step into a little bit of the educational unknown. So with that, thank you all for taking the time to be here today. I know we ran a little bit over. It's heartening to see so many people stuck around for it. Thank you, and we'll see you here next week on our next weekly virtual discussion.